not very much about that. But why are we forgetting this bit? Now the funny thing is, the work that we're doing as a charity with schools, the thing we're seeing the biggest difference in is people are just becoming more aware of their student needs and going, I had no idea she was sat there so quietly struggling. I didn't know. I had no idea the reason that doesn't work is because he always works with those two boys and they always ignore him. And I didn't realise that, I didn't see it. So we have our teacher eye, but we only have our teacher eye in many cases for, is the class going to kick off or not? Do I need to move on to the next thing or not? And actually, we need to get better at looking at individual student need. Now obviously there are lots of other things that teachers do, but I have a bee in my bonnet that we don't do enough of that, and we're moving too far. Evidence-based practice is all about fixing, and not about figuring out what needs to be fixed. So, that's the bee in my bonnet. Now I would say, I used to have this in a list. I've decided I wanted to be a matrix. I tweeted it the other day and everyone thought it was exciting, so I thought, well, I'll bung it up and see how we go. Now I think this is my way of thinking about professional development. Broadly speaking, there is kind of surface level change in what we understand in our practice, and there's deep level change. Now, if I literally know nothing, I'm about to teach a whole new subject which I've never done anything about. Someone tells me, right David, you're going to do economics. I basically know almost nothing about how to teach it. So the first thing I would want to do is inform myself by reading stuff, and then eventually I'd want to get better at actually improving what I do, and I'd maybe want to see someone else teach it for me, and then I'd kind of learn from them and I'd try and copy it, maybe role play a situation. I'd just keep practicing it. But eventually I'd have some embedded habits, and because I'm a teacher anyway, some of my practice would be quite stuck. So actually, because I have some pre-existing knowledge, sometimes people might have to coach me and go, you may not be aware you're doing that, but you need to change some things a bit. And actually maybe you can investigate why that's happening and then challenge yourself a bit, and maybe lesson study. Maybe if I've got existing habits and ideas and skills, then actually if someone just presents some information, then I'm not going to get anything from it. In order to shift my thinking, I might have to go through an emotional experience. The interesting thing is, one small study showed an inverse correlation between how happy people were on happy sheets at the end of a course and how much impact it had 2 years down the line. So if I'm highly abusive and unpleasant, you're probably more likely to remember it in 2 years' time. Basically challenge. We need to be challenged sometimes to kind of shake up what we're thinking. Now if you think about everyone comes to you on a bit of a spectrum. Every teacher has some stuff they don't know and some stuff they do know. So if you think about a brand new student in initial teacher education, there are some things they think they know. This is my experiences as what a classroom looks like from my school. I know a bit about my subject. And some things they haven't got a clue. How do I get them to behave? Sort of thing. There is a continuum. And actually, we clearly need to do all 4 of these things. And yet, somehow we mostly do that. Broadly, research tells us that's what we do, which is basically assuming people don't know stuff, and we're just going to tell them stuff, and somehow magic it to do all of that. Now, of course, some people do. Some people just pick up an idea and they run with it because they're really motivated. But that's not systematically, that's not helping us. That's not changing the profession as much as we need to. We need to move much more into this box. And maybe if we think about the fact that teachers, according to that American study, basically don't improve that much after year 3, maybe that's because they're kind of, most things they then know something about. And we need to do much more than transforming and making them reflect and think and use these sorts of approaches. Transformative professional development. Now the evidence base isn't massively strong for professional development, but it is very consistent. It's not a bad evidence base. Some people are a bit overly damning, some people are overly supportive. It's quite good, there's quite a lot of studies. And basically these are broadly the sort of things we know actually transform teacher practice. They don't just change practice, they improve student outcomes. So, number 1, focused on learning and not just on teacher practice. So it's not just how do you differentiate better, how do you help this student improve that better. Number 2, collaborative. If you work together with a group of teachers, it is more likely to improve your practice and student outcomes than if you go it alone. Relevant to your current classes and not here's an idea to use in 6 months' time. Sustained, I've already talked about that. I've talked about the fact it needs to be related to the theory, so it's not just do this and you will be good, but this is why, this is how, deepen your understanding. Evaluate it. If, as you are learning something, you evaluate the impact it's having, you're more likely to ultimately have more impact. That's not surprising. If you just learn something in the absence of evaluating it, whether you're any good at it, it's a bit like someone who's been singing in the shower for years and then goes on to X Factor, and then everyone goes, you're rubbish, because they never actually evaluated themselves as they went along or their impact. Challenging. It's not always happy, it's not always sad, but it can be challenging, so sometimes it can shake things up. We have lots of challenge in year 1. I bet most people either cried or were very close to it in their first year of teaching. I did. And it was really challenging, and yet that's when we all learn the most. And then finally, in an environment where you're allowed to learn and make mistakes. We was at a school recently where we were talking about how many risks you're allowed to take, and they said, oh yeah, it's quite good. I mean, you know, you are allowed to vary stuff, although I did change one of the department PowerPoint slides once and I got told off. Thought, that's not very risky. Another school, I said, to what extent do teachers take risks here? And they said, oh, we don't at all. Really? No, we don't. Well, we've got these drop-in inspections, you see. So why would you? Because one bad inspection. And some examples. So, Kegs, Tom Sherrington, who's on next, but you won't go to him because we'll go to Laura's, who's in here, his school, they did some lesson study work around physics. So this was a really interesting thing. They basically said, okay, what do our students need? What's the issue? We have an issue. They do science practicals, they get stuff out, they play around, they write stuff down, they go away, they don't seem to have learnt anything. I wonder why. They formed a triad of teachers, including Tom, who didn't lead it. He was just there as a kind of a co-conspirator. And they did this process of lesson study, which I'll talk about. And the interesting thing was, they thought there might be something which was the same about all these 3 children, was kind of different. There was, you know, one with a grouping issue, one with a behaviour issue, one with a vocabulary issue. But they did this process. Now that was sustained and collaborative and all these sorts of things that actually changed practice. Robert Ferguson Primary School, they said, we think we've got an issue with speaking skills in year 1. And they said, okay, we've got this approach we'd like to take, which we think is going to help us. And we're going to evaluate it carefully by having one of our classes do this and one of our classes not do it. We'll investigate it, they use lesson study again, but they noted a significant difference from one to the other. Huntington School identified issues around growth mindset in their school, a sustained 3-year focus on improving it. It's a collaborative project. I met their junior leadership team who are really focused on this approach. They're working collaboratively, they're working in sustained ways, systematically across the school, evaluating their impact all the way they go. And they were actually using some external expertise to challenge them as well. Christopher Whitehead's school, who I just visited the other day, they have this amazing observation room you might have read about in The Guardian. So that's like the window, and on the other side of that's the classroom, and teachers volunteer to go in there, and teachers can sit in the back here and you can chat away at normal voice and the kids can't hear you, and if you want to, there's a little camera, you can zoom in and look at the work on their desks, and you can have a chat about what's happening, and you really observe things you've never seen before because you're not in charge of that class and you're not worried about how they're looking at you. You just look. It's amazing. And it's collaborative, and it's discursive, and it's sustained because you can go back and do it again and again. Lesson study is a lovely model. I'm a big fan, as anyone who follows me on Twitter will have noticed. So basically you do this, you plan a lesson together, and you plan your activities, and because the 3 of us have planned this lesson together, then no one's really going to be looking at me and my teaching and going, outstanding, requires improvement, etc. We're basically going to go, let's look at the kids, because that's what we planned. But we predicted how the children would react, but we picked 3 of them, 3 case pupils, in the same way you've picked 3 case teachers. And we made predictions, first of all. We didn't go into the room until we'd said, I think this will happen. And then we watched. Of course, we were really interested in, did it happen? Were we right? And then afterwards, of course, we're going to want to ask the kids, why didn't you do this? Why did you do this? And then we'll talk about it naturally, because we're curious, because we predicted. And then we'll go, but why? That's really interesting. How can we help them do that? I want to find out more about this, because we're naturally curious, and because it's about something we're interested in. It's a great model. It takes up lots of time, but it's a great model. It's not a panacea, I've heard, there are various people who said, oh, I've done lesson study, it was a waste of time. You've got to set it up very carefully, but great model. Because it's focused on learning outcomes, it's collaborative, it's relevant to the class right now, can be sustained, depends. You have to go back to the theory and ask why. You're evaluating what you're doing by observing it and talking to the children all the time. It challenges you when they don't do what you expect. It's likely, if you're in a school that's doing that, you're probably led by leaders, but we don't know. So I think lesson study works because we do a lot of stuff through habit. And we don't even know why we do it. We've never even maybe thought about it. We just do it, we just expect stuff happens. It forces you to take all that implicit, tacit stuff and talk about it. And it makes it explicit. And all those things you've just kind of become automatic on are right there in front of you, and you have to talk about them before you then try them again. And every time you see something in practice, you have to think why. And then every time you think you've made a theory about something, you then see it in practice. And you get comments like this. And that bottom one was a primary school where they basically said, we've got a problem with spelling, punctuation and grammar. Every single teacher and teaching assistant did lesson study around SPAG. And then they literally found the head was like, it was amazing. Everyone was going past, how's your project going? What did you write? What method did you use? What were the children doing? Did you do, oh, we found one of our professional learners talking to each other about teaching. It changed what was happening. Suddenly seeing lessons without having to put a label on it. Allowing someone to come into your classroom or go into their classroom without it being about fear. Understanding more about individual students